February 8, 1942. As night fell, Japanese forces began crossing the Johor Strait towards Singapore Island. British commanders believed the main attack would come from the sea and that the city could hold out for months. The defenses in place reflected decades of confidence in naval power and imperial deterrence. Lieutenant General Arthur Percival commanded over 80,000 troops on the island. They included British Australian Indian and local units supported by artillery and coastal guns. On paper, the defenders outnumbered the attackers. The assumption was simple and deeply ingrained. Singapore was designed to resist a seaborne assault, not a land invasion. What was misunderstood was that the war had already changed. British confidence in Singapore rested on history and doctrine. For decades, the island had been the cornerstone of British strategy in the Far East. Its massive naval guns symbolized imperial strength and technological superiority. British planning assumed that any serious threat would be stopped by the Royal Navy. Ground forces were considered a secondary layer of defense. Air power was underdeveloped and often treated as auxiliary. This logic had worked in previous imperial conflicts. Naval dominance had secured trade routes and colonies across the globe. Singapore fit perfectly into that system. What British commanders failed to recognize was that the system depended on conditions that no longer existed. Air power mobility and speed had replaced battleships as decisive factors. Japan understood this shift clearly. The battlefield reality of Malaya undermined British assumptions before the battle for Singapore even began. Japanese forces advanced rapidly down the Malay Peninsula using bicycles, light infantry, and close air support. British units trained for static defense were repeatedly outmaneuvered. Japanese air superiority disrupted communication and supply lines. British aircraft were destroyed on the ground or forced to withdraw. Without air cover, ground forces lost mobility and coordination. Logistics collapsed under pressure. Fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements failed to arrive in sufficient quantity. Units fought in isolation rather than as part of an integrated defense. By the time Japanese forces reached Singapore Island, the defenders were already exhausted. The system designed to support them was no longer functioning. The initial Japanese assault targeted the weakest sectors of the defense. British commanders expected a diversion and misallocated reserves. Japanese units established beachheads and expanded rapidly. This was not a battle decided by individual heroism. It was a contest of tempo coordination and operational clarity. Japanese forces acted with speed and purpose, while British responses lagged. The British command structure struggled to adapt. Decisions were delayed, and information was incomplete. The defenders reacted rather than controlled events. Water supplies were threatened, and civilian panic increased. Each setback compounded the next. The system began to fail visibly. Percival faced a decision shaped by reality rather than doctrine. His forces were out of position, undersupplied, and vulnerable to further attack. Continuing resistance risked catastrophic civilian casualties. On February 15, 1942, Singapore surrendered. Over 80,000 troops became prisoners of war. It was the largest surrender in British military history. The fall of Singapore shocked the world. It demonstrated that imperial power built on outdated assumptions could collapse rapidly. No single mistake caused the defeat. Singapore fell because its defenders relied on a system designed for a different era. Air power mobility and integrated operations had rendered static fortresses obsolete. Japan exploited that mismatch with precision. In modern war, strength is not measured by symbols or reputation. It is measured by systems that adapt faster than the enemy. Singapore was not defeated by force alone, but by irrelevance.